334 BCE, the Granicus River, Asia Minor. Alexander has just stepped into the Persian Empire. Behind him lies the Hellespont. Ahead of him stands the first army sent to stop the Macedonian invasion before it can become a conquest. The battlefield seems to favor Persia. On the far bank of the Granicus, Persian cavalry holds the higher ground above the river. Behind them wait infantry and Greek mercenaries, heavy soldiers paid to defend the empire Alexander has come to break. The river is more than water. It is a barrier. The current disrupts horses. The muddy banks destroy formation. Any army crossing must climb out under attack while enemies strike from above. Alexander has fewer men on the field. His campaign is young, dangerous, and almost broke. If he fails here, the invasion may end before it truly begins. His senior commander advises caution. Wait until morning. Let the men rest. Do not attack a defended river late in the day. It is the rational choice.
But Alexander sees a different danger. Waiting gives Persia time to strengthen the position, time to gather more forces, time to choose the next battlefield on their terms. So Alexander attacks immediately. Cavalry first, straight into the river. Within minutes, Macedonian horsemen are struggling in the current under Persian missiles. The first assault bends under pressure. Persian nobles descend from the bank to drive them back. And then Alexander enters the fight. Royal armor flashing, companion cavalry around him, the king himself charging into the water. One blade, one spear, one moment of bad luck, and the entire invasion dies in the river. By the end of this battle, Alexander will survive one of the closest calls of his life, break the first Persian field army in Asia Minor, and prove that this campaign is not a raid. It is the beginning of a conquest. To understand why Granicus mattered so much, we need to step back to the spring of 334 BCE. Alexander had inherited the best army in Greece, but not unlimited money. Philip II had built Macedon into a military machine. Alexander was now trying to drive that machine into the greatest empire on earth. His finances were fragile. Ancient accounts emphasize how little money he had available at the start. His army had to win quickly, because without victory, there would be no captured cities, no tribute, no treasuries, and no campaign. The invasion needed momentum to survive. In Asia Minor, the Persian satraps gathered near Zelaya. These were regional governors responsible for stopping Alexander before he could secure the western coast. Among them was Memnon of Rhodes, a Greek mercenary general in Persian service. Memnon understood the situation better than most of them. Alexander did not need to be defeated in one glorious battle. He could be ruined by time. Memnon's advice was simple: avoid battle. Burn supplies, destroy crops, retreat inland, use the Persian fleet to threaten Macedonia and Greece behind Alexander. If Persia refused to feed the invasion, Alexander's army might collapse without a major fight. It was probably the best strategy, but the satraps rejected it. They distrusted Memnon. He was Greek. They were Persian nobles defending their own lands. Burning their territory felt dishonorable and politically impossible. So instead of denying Alexander battle, they gave him exactly what he needed: a chance to win fast. The Persian army moved to the Granicus River and took position on the eastern bank. The river protected their front. The higher bank gave their cavalry an advantage. The Macedonians would have to cross under fire, lose order in the water, and fight uphill before the phalanx could form properly. Persian cavalry stood forward along the bank. Behind them were infantry and Greek mercenaries. Their plan was clear: hit the Macedonians while they were vulnerable, break the crossing before Alexander could bring his army across. Alexander arrived later in the day. Parmenion, his most experienced general, urged him to wait. The argument made sense. A dawn crossing might be cleaner, the army would be rested, the Persians might even abandon the river position during the night. But Alexander had not come to Asia to let Persian commanders control the rhythm of the war. He ordered the attack. A forward force entered the river to test and disturb the Persian line. Ancient accounts connect this opening movement with Amyntas and Macedonian cavalry and light troops. Persian missiles came down from the bank. Horses slipped in the mud. Riders struggled to keep order while the current broke their formation. The Persians saw weakness and pushed down toward the river. That was the moment Alexander needed. The defenders had left the most secure part of their position. The fight had shifted into the riverbed. The Persian line had opened. Now Alexander struck with the companion cavalry. He angled his attack, used the Persian movement against them, and drove into the enemy left with the sharpest weapon in the Macedonian army. The companions charged in wedge formation. Long Ziston lances lowered. Horse against horse, noble against noble. The river crossing turned into a brutal mounted melee. Spears broke, swords came out. Men fought in mud and water while the Macedonian infantry forced its way forward behind them. Alexander was impossible to miss. He wanted his men to see him. But the Persians saw him too, and they came for him directly. Mithridates, connected to the Persian royal family, charged at Alexander and was killed. Rosaces struck Alexander's helmet and wounded him. Another Persian, Spithridates, was said to have raised his weapon for a fatal blow before Clytus the Black intervened and saved the king. For a few seconds, the whole campaign hung on individual combat. If Alexander died there, the army might still have fought bravely, but the invasion would have lost its center. He survived, and the battle changed. While the cavalry fought, the Macedonian phalanx pushed into the river. The Cereses gave the infantry reach even on difficult ground. The formation was compressed by the crossing, but it did not break. More Macedonians reached the eastern bank. The Persian cavalry had tried to break the crossing before the army could form. They failed. Now the pressure reversed. Alexander drove hard on one wing. The phalanx pushed through the center. Parmianus' side kept pressure elsewhere. What had begun as a dangerous river assault became a spreading Macedonian foothold. Once that foothold was secure, the Persian cavalry could no longer hold. The line gave way. Then it broke. Some Persian commanders were killed. Others escaped. The cavalry that had been placed to stop Alexander pulled away from the battlefield. The river was lost, but the battle was not over. Behind the Persian cavalry stood the Greek mercenaries. They had not been at the front of the first clash. They were still formed, disciplined, and dangerous. Professional soldiers, heavy infantry, men who understood shield line, spear wall, and close combat. Now they stood isolated. Alexander faced a choice. He could negotiate. He could let them surrender. He could pass them by. He did not. Alexander had framed his invasion as a pan-Hellenic war against Persia, revenge for past Persian invasions, and liberation for Greek cities in Asia. Greeks fighting for Persian gold threatened that entire story. To Alexander, they were not just enemies, they were traitors to the cause he claimed to lead. If they escaped, they would join the next Persian army. Alexander could not afford to leave thousands of trained Greek hoplites behind him, so he attacked. The phalanx advanced from the front. Macedonian cavalry moved around the flanks. The mercenaries fought hard, but they were alone, surrounded, and without cavalry support. This phase was bloody. The Greek line resisted fiercely. Macedonian losses may have been heavier here than during parts of the river fight itself, but isolation decided the outcome. The mercenary formation collapsed. Many were killed. Around 2,000 were captured according to ancient accounts and sent to Macedonia in chains as punishment for serving Persia against the Greek League. Alexander wanted the message to travel. Persia could hire Greeks, but Greeks who fought for Persia would pay a price. When the fighting ended, the numbers were less important than the result. Ancient casualty figures vary and often favor Alexander. Macedonian losses were presented as surprisingly low. Persian losses were heavier, especially among commanders and mercenaries. But the Persian army was not completely destroyed. Many escaped. Memnon survived. The Persian Empire was not shattered at Granicus. Not yet. And still, something irreversible had happened. The first defensive line in Asia Minor had failed. The satrapal army had been beaten in open battle. The psychological barrier was gone. Alexander had crossed the Hellespont as a risky invader with uncertain finances. After Granicus, he was a victorious king moving through Western Asia Minor with momentum. Dascalium was abandoned. Sardis surrendered. Ephesus opened its gates. Other cities followed. The conquest now had money, supplies, and legitimacy. The first victory had paid for the next stage. That is why Granicus matters. It was not Alexander's greatest battle. It was not as dramatic as Issus. It was not as decisive as Gaugamela. It did not destroy the Persian Empire, but it made the conquest possible. Before Granicus, Alexander's invasion was a gamble. After Granicus, it became a campaign. The battle proved three things. First, Persia could be beaten on Asian soil. The Achaemenid Empire had wealth, cavalry, satraps, and hired Greek soldiers. Alexander needed to show that the empire could bleed. At the Granicus, it did. Second, Alexander showed how he would command. He would not remain behind the line. He would fight where the battle was most dangerous and where the result could turn in seconds. That nearly killed him, but it also bound his army to him. Third, Granicus solved the immediate crisis of the campaign. Victory opened cities. Cities opened treasuries. Treasuries kept the army moving. Without that, the dream of conquering Persia might have ended as a short raid across the Hellespont. Parmenian's caution had been reasonable. The attack was dangerous. Alexander survived by a narrow margin.
But timing can matter as much as safety. Alexander understood that his army could not afford to wait for perfect conditions. He needed Persia to react to him, not the other way around. At the Granicus River, he seized that rhythm. Far to the east, Darius III now had to understand what had happened. This was not a border disturbance, not a young king seeking plunder before returning home. A Macedonian army had crossed into Asia, defeated a Persian force, punished Greek mercenaries in Persian service, and begun taking the cities of the Western Empire. The next time Alexander faced Persia, he would not be fighting only satraps on a riverbank. He would be moving toward the great king himself. And the next battlefield would not be a river crossing. It would be a narrow coastal plain where mountains and sea trapped two armies face to face. There, at Issus, Alexander would meet Darius III for the first time, and the war would become personal.